Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Mr.Within's gift channel. These tend to go up to 40 minutes. Tune in as much as you can and then vibe naturally. See, the title I chose for this episode is Beyond the Eyes of Nature, and I find that to be a very profound implication because sight is the is one of the most fundamental extractors of meaning we have in some sense. In some sense, light is our eyes show the chessboard, but then our journey through what we see suggests in some sense the value of each piece and the ability. Beyond the Eyes of Nature is a suggestion that there is more to uncover and explore. How would I say this? It's as if, like, on the surface of a planet, a creature advanced to a point where it separated itself with the world. It developed language and in some sense allowed itself to simulate a version of the world where it could change in its mind. So right now, when we ask ourselves who we are, it is not just, we're not just asking it in a physical realm, we're also asking it in what I have considered and in some sense called the subjective realm of my book. You know, the reason I call it the subjective realm is because all my opinions on what the world is are moving through rivers of language in an abstract, non-physical kind of aware space. So what I mean by that is the reason I was drawn to meditation very early on, not very early, I mean, like, I was first introduced to prayer and religion, but then I went to a point where I realized stories can't help me when I need my experience to walk through the door. And what that means is you at some point stop storifying reality, and it becomes that moment suddenly is found in an emptiness equal to the emptiness of a page before writing anything on it, as if there is an awareness to space, but that awareness is not a thing, but it is aware of a space where things can be. And in some sense, there are many, in some sense, spiritual traditions throughout the world where it's fascinating. I was like, spirituality, there are rebels against God and there are also rebels for God. And what I mean by that is there is a religious spiritualism in some sense, where through a religious framework, a supernatural sense of reality is being experienced, and a supernatural sense of reality means that it is like there are things happening in your moment of being that your senses cannot explain. Meaningless movement of neurons in your brain cannot explain, as if there is an attention, as if that remote control car there's no driver inside. And so where is the frequency of intelligence being provided? So we see that life is in some sense a relationship with a physical reality. We cannot ignore this. There's a world given, there's a chessboard, and then it is given in some sense there's a chessboard with pieces, but then what the pieces mean, it's as if the way we've evolved, each piece has a self-awareness, you know, and the greater its understanding of the chessboard, the more its moves are authorized. And in some sense one can say karmic trials and tribulations are in some sense a being who has not realized where he is. He is in some sense trapped in identification with a momentary thought. For me, one of the most profoundest things, like if somebody asks me what meditation is, I'll tell you, it's kind of like in the busy dynamism of a changing world, you just become still and silent for a moment and you take it all in. And when you take it all in, it's like you're as if taking the idea of the world you have, like let's say like psychedelic mushrooms, you take it. I haven't taken psychedelic mushrooms for now, you know, in my life. There were opportunities, of course, but what I'm trying to say is that you can, in some sense, experience the meaning of your thoughts by concentrating on the source of your attention, of your moment of being. What I mean by that is I was asking questions of such profound intensity in my mind when I was younger. I was in some sense in my own room shouting to the gods of the world, asking, what is this design that you have put before me? You know, and asking, what is the design of my eyes? Where are my preferences and my personality coming from? At the core of my personality, is it all just the movement of memory and imagination, or is there, or are memory and imagination in some sense vehicles being maneuvered by what comes across as a higher dimensional unknown dimension of some sorts? You know, for me, I had a very nice talk actually. I gave, what was it called? It was called Unknown Mountains of a Hidden World, something like that. And the whole notion was that there are worlds behind our eyes as much as there's a world in front of it. And the worlds behind our eyes is kind of like a filtering process where, after accumulating a certain let's give a measurement to memory. I mean, this is another talk where we discuss if memory is limited or limitless, but I'm saying let's assume that memory is limited to some degree. Okay? And so what I mean by that is that a lot of a person's preferences are at first originating from how, in a snowball effect kind of manner, they lived through life. They went through various experiences that defined the reference points for emotion and thought. And so what it is that I was playing a game. Life was a game for me. And then I asked who's playing a game, and then I realized the player playing the game cannot be a game. There cannot be an illusion once there is a certain level of self-inquiry about one's true nature, which leads one into what I'm going to say a non-objective, non-subjective awareness of subjectivity and objectivity. What that means is it's as if you feel your eyes have never closed, even though the world has changes and many people die. You know, it's like, what I like to say, it has the elegance of an eternal moment, but it is an instant in temporary life. So for me, I find that I can, in some sense, very playfully try to explain God mathematically, you know? And I don't find it's that difficult. It's in some sense, okay, here, I'll say it. I was saying this to my brother and we were laughing. You know, I was like, okay, I figured out what God is. It's, you know, 0, 1, 2. As if nothing, something, and then infinity. That's a variation. But then one can say, like, I was reading this book by Daniel Talbot. This man's like some sort of like savant with a unique mind. And in that book, he was talking about how when he was younger, he was going home, right? He was walking home, and then he started to, in some sense, divide the distance of every step he took, you know, from one light post to another. And so he realized that if you keep dividing it goes into an endless tiny step every time, you know? So in some sense, there is between two light posts, in some sense, an infinite stretch of movement, I can say, right? Of different values. So one can say that life is a dynamic story. This is the world of the ego. But then there's an aspect of life where, from a dynamic personality, it has become a static presence. That's what meditation is interested in. Meditation is not interested in trying to make you, you know, a jolly good, like, you know, better person with better desires. You know, it's not here to polish your behavior per se. Meditation is a human being. Like, imagine back in the day, guys. It's very obvious how you can imagine it. Back in the day, there was no TV. So either you walked endlessly on the surface of this planet exploring different things, or you sat still. You sat still and began wondering about the exploration of the inner realms. The exploration of the inner realms, first there's a practice given so people get into their egos. Many people don't realize, but you know, it's like in a world where we can hide, we act like gods behind our own doors. And what I mean by that is that there is a source of security where people don't normally let their opinions change unless there is a profound implication, right? So there's a sense of, because we're social creatures, because the image of who we are and the image of the world matters in regards to how we protect the future. One can say that spirituality is not just the relationship of the present moment where all these gurus are like here and now, be here and now, guys. No. You stay here and now to receive the way the world is flowing towards what has not arrived yet. And what I mean by that is mystics are lovers of the unknown. Most people, they're afraid, they are victims of the unknown. Mystics are lovers. They realize that to attach to anything in a temporary universe is in some sense confusion, because that thing will change. So many of us are holding beliefs that tomorrow can change. And if a belief can change, we have to ask what is changing it. And this is what Mr. Within says, it is the directest experience the person has. That means, like, it was very hilarious. I have a cousin who is in his own right a very bright scholar. And this cousin of mine lived in Germany. He went to London, got a PhD in philosophy and a master's in business, and now is teaching in university, right? But I remember he has a very, very profound spiritual side as well. And what I mean by a spiritual side, I mean he has animated the unknown in his own personal story. But this is why we say we are a young species. We are a young species because our confrontation of the unknown is limited. And the more children of the future generations depend on technologies to do the search, the technology will limit them in their world. That means imagine like you're asking a lion to help you. Okay, this lion is called technology, and it listens to you at first. You know, you tell the lion, go hunt that gazelle, you know. And then eventually, after some point, this lion asks itself, why am I listening to you? And you at that point, you better be a good runner. So what I mean by that is that it is the same in some sense with belief systems that refuse to change. Now, there is a part of the belief that can change, and there's a part of the belief that cannot change. So this is the thing about religion that I find it should be considered, because these Mr. Within talks I'm giving, I mean, like, the idea of Mr. Within is to just wonder about where the abstraction behind our eyes leads experientially, right? So experientially, we're just journeying through this life, and I have a very nice concept I created for this. It's called experience tunneling. That means we're tunneling through different experiences, through different moments of existence, but at some point, you wonder of the value of the journey to this present moment that you are in. And either you have to sculpt the unknown in your knowledge, or you have to let go of your knowledge to perceive the true presence of the unknown. That means you cannot be fake with truth, right? And that comes down to, in some sense, being sincere. And being sincere means you got to go at your own pace. You know, it's like, I am against this idea that every person has to suddenly, like, meditate in the world and become super spiritual and, like, you know, wonder about metaphysical realities and whatnot. I am against this idea. I find that we're in a natural reality. On some level, spirituality, let me tell you where it takes you. It takes you to an intelligent sight of an emptiness. When you observe this intelligent sight of emptiness, it's very profound, because you've gone to the earliest memory you have, and whatever, like, I found this to be very phenomenal. Oh my God, I gotta say this. See, guys, at a certain age, I decided to be a mystic of my own mind, an explorer of my own mind. I decided, and my mind wasn't just my preferences. I realized that early on. It is in some sense conditioned by everything that it is present among and as. I looked at memory, and this is the interesting thing I was going to say. I looked at memory and I'm like, wait a minute. So right now I'm this person, you know, let's see what time it is. It's 3 a.m. I'm going to do this in present right now, you know. So guys, right now it's 3 a.m., right? There was a time in my life where I just looked at the time. I'm like, okay. And then I asked myself, so if this is a memory, if literally like a minute ago has become a memory, let me see how far the memory goes. So I sat silently still and silent and closed my eyes, and I tried to reach my earliest memory. Coincident, like hilariously for me, my earliest memory, I think I was like 3 months old, and it was like a nightmare. It was like this weird thing entering my room. Like I had a conscious awareness of the room. And I was so small I could even be aware of my body at that moment, you know? And so I looked at the earliest memory I had, and then I realized if I wonder about past lives and if there was another memory, that would suddenly go into the realm of imagination. And if I wondered about the future, and that goes to imagination. So in some sense, it's like this like 180 curve where on one angle we have like the edges are infinite, right? Because it leads to the edge of your real memory, let's say, your memory about real life experiences, physical experiences you've had. At the edge of it, it leads to imagination. At the other side of it, it also leads to the imagination. So in some sense, the future and the past, in my mind, it was a question. I'm like, how is it in the realm of imagination? If I can, you know, and how would I say this to you? It's like, we don't know what imagination is. It is a showcase of certain, as if in another room you're looking at a projector, but this projector comes across as if it's all happening in your mind. So there was an issue of the localization of consciousness. Is consciousness at its core local or non-local? If it's non-local, this implies that we are collectively a sort of being. You know, that means we are like me and you right now. You listening to this is kind of like, imagine the cells, one of the cells in your body, you know, decided to like create a podcast and another cell listen to it, and in this you know cell in your body this biological cell is like, yo guys, we're not just the body. And so this is very interesting, because either we are all one being or we are in an infinitude. Either it is infinite change or it is one eternal present moment, right? And these are interesting ideas because they are, in some sense, questioning the fundamental dualities where you have, in some sense, made the axis for just your universal philosophy, your universal perception. You know, that means how I see the universe, it had meaning for me. Life had an incredibly beautiful, at the same time, comedy, tragedy kind of story for me. It's still, there's a part of it that still does have a story. I have to function as a story too whenever I speak. But in my silence, I am not a physical being with a personality. I am just a presence of a moment of being there, you know. And I playfully, you know, I could say my greater body, like let's say my higher dimensional presence, is actually not a higher dimension. It's me being my whole moment of being rather than a part of it. And in that moment, fear dissipates because consciousness is borderless. This is why if spirituality is understood by the mainstream to have real significance, even a significance beyond narrative, one that contributes to experiential exploration of just our true nature, we are left in a position where self that can even acknowledge God. So one has to, in some sense, ask themselves, how are they believing? Not how are they believing in their self. What are your beliefs about yourself? And this is the point where it's no longer that spirituality is interesting, the unknown is interesting. The battle of religion and science is that should unknown ideas govern, or should known ideas govern? And the general consensus is that known ideas should govern, but we shouldn't get rid of unknown ideas. We should, in some sense, find ways where it's very interesting. It's as if like religions are kaleidoscopes where you got to look at it in the right way to see a certain geometric design-based significance in how the narrative was written. You know, it's as if I have read things in religions and I'm like, oh my God, has this been passed? Has this, like, you know, when I was reading the Quran, I was like, oh my God, this concept of a sort of after death resurrection and then judgment system and the end up into an outcome of peacefulness or non-peacefulness. I was like, wow, as if religions are saying, hey people, think of peacefulness in the future, so you behave peacefully now. But this peacefulness has been interpreted by some where they think it doesn't matter if they're violent as long as they are listening to the story. And that is in some sense an issue, because we're not just creatures that must, like, if you listen to a story, that means like, then what's the point of having aql? What's the point of having your mind? Your mind is not just a story receiver or a story follower. It is a story leader. It is a story generator. That means once you understand how in every moment anything that has value is how memory and imagination dance in a way where it's as if like you have a past, present, future. There are moments and there are cultures where there are wisdom traditions in some sense. How can I say this? They honored the unknown. And to honor the unknown is faith. Because it's as if a part of the intelligence is unknown, but there's enough revealed to acknowledge that there could be a pattern of relevance or a certain relationship. You know, so life is not just about your relationship or what boats you get on. Religion is part of the mountain to realizing your true nature. This is the most valuable thing. Once you realize your true nature, it's as if you're abiding by the flow of natural existence. It's as if you don't fear change because you have become the change. And then you look at society and you're like, our future deserves a better community, a better civility. And children are going to be born that are going to be that are going to astonish us. You know, I'm not living on in a planet right now as I'm speaking where I'm terrified of the outcome. I am just watching the greatest performance ever unravel in every moment that I am conscious. And this is why there is a sort of gratefulness that has brought me karmic peace. What I mean by karmic peace is that I go through various moments, and because I am sincere, because I am just simple, complexity happens on its own. Complexity gets automated by the intelligence of the natural world. This doesn't mean I don't care about complexity. It just means that I maneuver simply because I am fascinated by how the complexity reveals itself in every moment. And, you know, I read this dervish quote where it says, those who try to get enlightened through the path of intellect, they got to be careful. They got to be careful, because if they are in some sense lost in ego, it's as if they're whipping a dead mule and asking it to run faster. You know, it's like ridiculous. So for me, this is the very interesting notion that our world is divided between concepts with various contexts, and sometimes the concept could be in space and time, but the context could be timeless. You know, sometimes the concept could be full with meaning, shape, and form, but the context is empty, and in some sense the space where all occurs, you know. So beyond the eyes of nature, means an acceptance of the movement of intelligence regardless of how you gave it value in one certain moment or an image in your head, which is in some sense how memory comes across. Imagination, in one of my talks, I called it a nation of images. Because it is actually, there are some words in the English language where we understand them, but they are not physical relationships. So as if the mind has evolved, language has developed, technologies have taken form in very great ways and contributing ways. But now, with our advanced intelligence, what is the purpose? And it is not to just walk in a sandbox of materialism. It is to attempt to explore the greatest questions of existence. We should not fear the questions that begin with these three, with why. Even though the mind, some traditions have said it's a trickster, it can take you into simulated infinite journeys where you think you are finding truth, but in a sense you are lost in stories of another. It's as if you've given the driver's wheel to another aspect of your sense of being, and that intelligence is maneuvering you in a way where you don't realize, similar to children who open their eyes and the house of their parents, and then when their parents speak and the community engages, they begin to be sculpted by the experiences they have. So for me, there was a time where I was like sad about my childhood, not in the way that it wasn't blessed, but in a way where it was like, I was like, why did that have to happen? Why did that have to happen? And then I realized everything that happened in my childhood was God, in some sense, I'm going to say it was like God's first experiences that were given, to me. And what I mean by that is as if the universe wanted me to see it that way and that way and that way. And as I took this narrative into consideration, that life was trying to shape me into greatness, I realized that the greatness was already known. Because in the word unknown, we have first knowledge and then what there isn't. Do you see? This is why Socrates says the only true wisdom is to know that you know nothing. But the knowledge is given first, then the unknown is shown. Then the unknown is considered. So in some sense, we know ourselves before we know ourselves. And this has come across in different ways in certain spiritual traditions. Spirituality could be the mind's effort of self-realization. All spiritual narratives fit in that category. But samadhi or meditation, as ancient Indian culture, ancient Vedic culture tells us, it is one where you have gotten tired of the repetition of the same conclusions. And so that's when you, in some sense, as the Sufi mystic poet Hafiz, ancient Persian poet, he said this from 700, 800, I don't know, what is it, 700 to 900 years ago, sometime around that. He said, you must die before you die, which means you must allow your mind to open in new ways, because before you close your eyes with a closed mind on the surface of this planet. There's also this other interesting quote that says, when the child is born, the child cries and the world laughs. When the child dies, the child laughs and the world cries. And where the civilization needs to be, and it will be soon, is a place where it is peaceful, graceful, high energy, high affinity, high happiness. Enough happiness. We're not trying to get rid of chaos. We're just trying to create atmospheres of peacefulness in order for the greatest ideas of mankind to step forth. My greatest task in this world is not to hold a microphone in front of large audiences. It is to create such a microphone, such a stage that the children of the next generations are allowed to be themselves, and they do not get lost in the story of the world because, they're suddenly born in a part of it. When knowledge respects the unknown, eternity is rediscovered through temporary dialogue. Beyond the eyes of nature, the true self of existence stands prior to any interpretation. It is pre-thought. It is a moment pre-thought. Once this presence is felt without your emotions interpreting or bringing about certain values for stories, you will find in some sense what I like to call pure emotions, enlightening emotions. Pretty much bliss. You realize that conscious existence is bliss. And then gratefulness is like the karmic lords gaze upon you and they're like, this being has realized that there is nothing wrong, when the correct perception could have been considered from the start. There's no way to live wrong on this planet, but there are ways to live efficiently and to have enough efficient vision that greatness reveals itself before the final curtain. I hope this talk has served you. Beyond the eyes of nature, the presence of an absolute universal intelligence smiles through us all. This doesn't mean we accept the end by accepting the beginning. It means the end and the beginning are a moment's notice. Now I wanted to end the talk off here, but actually I'm going to say one more thing. My experience of meditative practice has been different from traditional methods because traditional methods seemed mechanical to me. So I just abided by what I felt was intuitively right. I did what felt intuitively correct to me in that moment, and as I listened to the hidden voice of the universe that, in some sense, marched through my mind with my heartbeat, it's like, listen to your true nature, learn to abide by it. And once you have realized the inseparability of the individual self with the inseparability of the individual self with the cosmic self, the micro self with the macro self, and that moment you will gaze upon the world no longer needing philosophies, meditation practices, spiritual or scientific you don't need stories. At that point you will realize the value of how this other Sufi mystic Persian poet, ancient times, 790 years ago, he said, don't be satisfied with stories, go unfold your own myth. Which means, do not accept your beliefs when they can change. Do not accept yourself when it is the source of change. It is the origin of the values of life. That your mind has been so advanced that it has subconsciously sculpted for you a realm of meaning. And we have to use conscious existence and conscious knowledge. We should not burn the libraries because psychedelics are nice, we should never do this. We should realize everything in manifestation, influenced by the attention of what I like to call of a solar intelligence. Solar, both in the way that it sounds like it has to do with light, and also in the way it's spelled SOULAR, solar intelligence. To activate a solar intelligence means to be a universal being. You no longer have desires of an inferior bias, of an interpretation of yourself. You realize every moment the universe is being itself. Why can you not? Why can't you? You know, you laugh. You laugh at the seriousness of the worlds you believed in because the times were hard and the economy was depressed. Smile beyond the color of green, whether you find it in plants or in your wallet. The natural world is the greatest teacher, which renders your moment of being, as your moment of existence, as your greatest teacher. Any being who realizes self-awareness is how there is an awareness to a sense of self being shaped in every moment. You realize that awareness needs no clothing. It needs no idea of self. And that's when you find the naked truth. I hope this talk has served you. Much blessings and namaste.